And we're live. Welcome to Brave New History. We're here with David Lane, Dr. David C. Lane. We're talking about how do religions form. So thank you for joining us here. I really appreciate it. And let's see, Dr. Lane is a professor of philosophy and sociology at Mount St. Antonio College in Walnut, California. He's notable for his book, The Making of a Spiritual Movement, The Untold Story of Paul Twitchell and Eckankar. So, yeah, maybe we'll start if you want to tell us a little about yourself, your background.
Yeah, I've been a professor of philosophy for 33 years. Before that, I taught at Cal State Long Beach for a decade in the religious studies department. And before that, I taught at UCSD, University of California, San Diego, in the Warren Writing program. So I've been teaching for, gosh, I'm getting old. I'm getting 45 years, I think. And my forte had been the history of North Indian religions and their influences on new religious movements in America. However, I'm really interested in science. So my classes, here's a quote. In fact, I talked about this today when I was surfing. Philosophy done well is science. Philosophy done poorly is, well, philosophy. So the last thing we want to do is philosophy. So I've been highly influenced by Edward O. Wilson at Harvard University. He wrote a wonderful book, controversial, back in 1998 called Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge. So in my classes, what I try to do is try to explain everything either by math. If you can't teach it, if you can't explain it by math, go to physics. If you can't explain it by physics, okay, we'll go to chemistry. Can't explain it by chemistry, let's go to biology. Can't do biology, go to psychology. Can't do psychology, go to sociology. And if you can't explain it by that, well, God did it, which is another way of saying we never try to explain metaphysics. We try to go as, intertheoretic reductionism as much as possible. So that's kind of been my background. I've recently just got a book published by Cambridge University, which you'd be interested in, which is called The Sound Current Tradition, which was about the history of the idea of meditation, of listening to an inner subtle sound, and all these different religions like Eckankar, MSIA, Master Path, Divine Light Mission, Qinghai out of Taiwan. They all teach the same thing. So that was kind of my background. Recently, I've been working on that.
Yeah. So I've heard of Master Path. Back in college, I knew a guy that was in that.
Yeah. The founder of that is Gary Olson. Gary Olson used to be a member of Eckankar. And when Eckankar had it split back in 1983, when Darwin Gross got excommunicated, he was the leading master. When he got excommunicated by the group, by the new master, Harold Clamp, eventually Gary Olson started his own path called Master Path. Well, you'll like this story. Back in 1995, however, I found out he was plagiarizing like really extensively, but not even like the plagiarism that, most people do, like Wikipedia, copy and paste. He would just photocopy from a book, white it out, and then, publish it. Well, I wrote him a letter and said, look, I've done a study. I'm going to publish it on the internet because that was relatively new, the World Wide Web back in 95. And he wrote me a letter. Actually, his secretary called me and said, well, we want to fly you to New Mexico. Gary's a big fan of your work, on Eckankar, yada, yada, yada. I said, I'm not going to fly to New Mexico. I just simply said, So I gave him an alternative. I said, you can publicly apologize for your plagiarism before I publish. And he did. That's what he did. And then he eventually sent me flowers, kind of love bombed me at the end. But then eventually found out he still plagiarized. And so he was an offshoot of Eckankar. And so his group is not very big, but he lives in the desert actually right now. And he only shows up to seminars about 4 or 5 times a year. He just likes to collect the check.
He just likes to what?
To collect the checks, the money that people have to send in order to be a member of MasterPath.
Got it. Well, he still doesn't like you?
No, well, one weird story. I have a friend of mine who was doing his yard in the desert. He was doing gardening for the guy.
Yeah.
He was talking to Gary, and all of a sudden my name comes up, and Gary tells the guy to leave. He backs up and says, get off my property. So, yeah, it's kind of a funny thing.
Wow. So he's sending you flowers and baskets, but...
then later, the relationship, we broke up, I
guess. Well, that's too bad, but what can you do, I guess?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Which, I mean, yeah, that's an unusual reaction for like a such strong criticism, right? But
well, because
maybe he's proving to himself that he's the good guy, I guess.
Maybe. Also, he's self-styled. Nobody appointed him. He just created his own group, and he charges money, which he doesn't need to. But I guess in order to support his living, that's why a lot of these guys, that's what they do. They don't have a job, and they say, "Well, God, now I'm God. I'm enlightened, and I'll get $100 a month."
That works. I wonder. Maybe I'll learn something here, and then I can run my own hustle.
Well, here you'll like this one. There's another guy offshoot named Jerry Mulvin. Now, Jerry Mulvin started his own group called the Divine Science of Light and Sound. Okay, before he did this, he asked me to come to his house in Northridge, California. He was living with his girlfriend's aunt or whatever. And as we're conversing about Eckankar, because he broke off, thought Eckankar was a fraud, he says, "Dave, with all this knowledge, you could start your own cult." And I looked at him and go, "You can't do that. That's a complete fraud." Well, a year later, I get a letter from somebody who says they found the true master, and it was Jerry Mulvin. He'd started his own group called the Divine Science of Light and Sound. So I wrote him a letter and said, "Hey, come on. I know who you are. I mean, you're not like Divine Lightland." And he wrote me a very interesting letter, terse, and basically said, yada, yada, yada. He said, "Some of us intellectualize the path like you do, Dave, but some of us are the masters," and signed the master. He didn't even sign it Jerry. He's the master. Well, here's the interesting story about him. In fact, it's a warning to anybody who does weird stuff on the computer. Apparently, his computer hard drive broke down, and he asked somebody to fix it. Well, it turned out he had child porn on his hard drive. That's right. And they did a sting operation on him, and he eventually got, I think he went to prison or jail. He's no longer the master. So, weird story.
Yeah, it's kind of a recurring theme, like Warren Jeffs. He's in jail for something similar. Right. That I don't know, the power just gets to you, and you think you wonder, because I mean, most people, no matter how much power they'd have, they would never do something like that, right?
Actually, to be surprised, there's three things I've noticed, especially if it's a male cult leader. It's sex, it's money, and it's power. And you always find one of those, no matter what happens. It's going to be sex, money, or power. And usually for males, lots of it's sex. And then if it's not the sex, it's the money. And if it's not the money, it's the power, the idea, I can control your life.
Got it. And they don't have any altruistic New Age religions?
Some do. Obviously, you had a good point there. I mean, I don't want to throw out the baby in the bathwater here, but an example of the power was a guy named Andrew Cohen. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he had a spiritual group for 25, 30 years. And he was into power, like controlling his disciples. He wasn't having sex with his disciples. Exposed, on because everybody thought he was a fraud, but he resurrected himself. Like in the last couple of years, he's now on the internet. He's come back because he likes being a guru, and I think he believes that he's being altruistic, although objectively you see narcissism is what I see.
Yeah. So with Eckankar, and so Paul Twitchell basically lifted all his stuff, right?
Paul Twitchell is a very interesting guy. He claimed he was born to his second wife. He was born in 1922. He was really born in 1909. So he lied. Now, why would he lie? Because the woman he was dating was 20 years old, and he's 50. So he wants to claim, maybe I'm 39, kind of do a Jack Benny routine. He starts Eckankar in 1965. And like you mentioned, what he did was he would plagiarize, not everything, but he would plagiarize most of his teachings from previous groups that he was associated with, whether it was the Self-Realization Fellowship, whether it was Rouhani Satsang that was founded by Kirpal Singh, who he met in 55, or whether it was Scientology, because he was a press agent for L. Ron Hubbard in the late 50s. So what we found out when I was a young kid, 20 years old, doing a silly term paper, I found that he had plagiarized extensively, like in one particular book called The Far Country. I found 400 paragraphs that were word by word by word by word. Mm-hmm. And created a mythology about himself. Like, for instance, he didn't want people to know really about his past. So he created a neo-mythology. So he claimed that he got the true teachings of Eckankar from a 500-year-old Tibetan monk named Rebazar Tars, who lives up in the Himalayan mountains that nobody's ever met. Now, we found out that Twitchell never went to India. We found out Rebbe Zartars is a fake name. He claimed there was another guy named Sudar Singh, another fake name. He talks about masters like Go and Fubby Quants and Yabul. I mean, he's just making this stuff up. So he claims that the true teachings of Eckankar came from Venus, from the city of Retz. Must have been really hot about 6 million years ago, and brought him to this other guy named Rama, who then transmitted to all these different gurus until finally Twitchell became the living Eckmaster of modern times. But he died in 1971. His wife then appointed another guy named Darwin Gross, for which she was probably having an affair. Not to get scandalous, but it's probably obvious. She then marries the guy. Then they get divorced in 1978. And then in 1981, he's tired of working. So he hires this guy named Harold Klemp, who was working in the print office. But he doesn't give him enough respect. So 2 years later, Klemp sues him, excommunicates him. And today, nobody ever hears about Darwin Gross. He's dead now. But Harold Klemp is the leader of Eckankar. And Eckankar teaches about soul travel and dreaming and all that.
What was that last part?
They teach about soul travel and dreaming, leaving your body.
Yeah, I like I mentioned before we started, I live in Minnesota. I've been there twice, I think. They're all about that, right? Like you're supposed to spell out dream quest before you go to sleep, and then you'll have a dream quest.
Well, it works, as you know. If you start, listen, I even dream about Eckankar Masters because I've been reading this stuff so much. I see Rebbe Zartars in my dreams too. It's like, And so, like, anytime that one of the things, the reason Eckankar works, I know it's going to sound silly, but it's true. The reason it works is that everybody dreams, every night, no matter what. And if you start reading Eckankar literature, about the Eckankar Masters, and you start thinking it's spiritual, well, you're starting to get a lot of juice. You're starting to feel a hit. So they don't care about the plagiarism. They don't care if Twitchell's a liar. They don't care that Harold Klemp is boring as hell. If you ever see him talk, it's like you want to go to sleep. They don't care because they're getting some experience. And that's understandable. I mean, all religions do that, right?
Yeah. I think, at least on my end, it cut out for a second there.
Oh, there's a lag there. Yeah.
But, I noticed that too. I was thinking that, like, I've heard him talk. It must have been on like YouTube or something, but like nothing happens in his stories, right? And he's talking about there was a baby, gave it water because it was crying, and then it was happy.
You're totally right. Very dull.
Yeah, I mean, no. If there's Eckists, I don't mean any offense or any slam, but you wonder. He doesn't look like the kind of guy who's going to organize a coup to take over the religion, right?
Right.
So, but I mean, what happened exactly? Do we know?
Well, I think a couple of things happened. We kind of know this. A couple of things we know. Number one, Darwin Gross was known to be a womanizer. And that was kind of coming back. There was bad rumors about him. He also embezzled about, as far as we can tell, $2 to $3 million in a front organization in Oregon. And here's the punchline with Darwin. Darwin didn't really want to work. He's a musician. He likes playing his tones. He's pretty good at it. And he really wanted somebody else to do all the office work, but still have the title of Mahanta. So he retained the title of Mahanta, which is his other title, gave Klemp the living Eckmaster, but he didn't give him the respect. In a couple of years, that kind of grated on Klemp. And there were people around Klemp who also didn't like Darwin, didn't think he was really good for the organization, found out he was embezzling money. They excommunicated him, and then they sued him. And Darwin, of course, he couldn't do it. He didn't have a pot to piss in, so he ended up moving to Oregon and started his own group called Adam, which is an acronym for his ancient teachings of the masters. And so he started his own group, but very few followers. Ancient teachings of the masters.
Adam. Okay. So I was thinking Adatum, if you've heard of that group.
Adidan? You're talking about Duff Rejon? Maybe no, that's something different. I'm
not super familiar. It's like a Rosicrucian deal.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
So basically, Klemp did what he had to do, essentially.
Right. No, I listen, understandable. I mean, on one level, right? But the other level, here's the weird part of it, people were really upset and they wanted to follow Darwin. They couldn't understand it. So Harold started sending out letters saying that in the dream state, you might see a dark magician, a black magician. I don't know what he means by black magician, and so he says you got to fight them and evil spirits. And he was really talking about Darwin Gross. So he was really trying to throw him under the bus, saying he's part of the negative power. And that's what Eckankar did with me. They basically said you're going to like this one. I have reincarnated over many lives to destroy the true teachings of Eckankar. Now I'm like 20 years old, dude. I look like I was 15. I go, what the hell is this? So they're just so silly. John Roger Hinkins, who's another offshoot. You've heard of the Huffington Post? I don't know if you've ever heard of the Huffington Post. Well, Ariana Huffington used to be a follower of John Roger Hinkins. Well, John Roger Hinkins, who founded MSIA, he was a follower of Eckankar for about a year or two. So he started his own group. He branched off. And anytime you don't like somebody, you come up with a negative power name. So in Eckankar, it's Kal, which literally a Sanskrit word, which means time. In MSIA, it's called the red monk. You got the red monk disease. Well, I'm very happy to say I've gotten both titles from both groups because they don't like people that are critical or negative.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you recall your past lifetimes of trying to destroy the truth?
Of course. No, I'm joking. I have no memory of anything whatsoever. I'm an idiot. I can't remember anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, it probably goes hand in hand with trying to destroy the truth. I don't know, but I'll have to ask.
Maybe I'm suppressing it. I just don't want my true identity known.
There you go. Maybe after I interview Clem, maybe he'll let me know. But,
right.
So there's that. So Eckankar, is that like a direct offshoot of, or was it just kind of like a syncretism?
Right. Good point. It's a conglomeration of the influences of Paul Twitchell's life. I called it Twitchellian choice. And essentially, he's been influenced by Theosophy, as founded by Ladon Velikovsky, Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, Self-Realization Fellowship by Yogananda, or Swami Premananda, was kind of a branch off in Washington, but primarily Kirpal Singh, who was founder of Ruhani Satsang, who taught this thing called Shabad Yoga. And Shabad Yoga is this technique that's been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. It's even in Christianity on some level about listening to an internal sound, a mystical sound, which causes your body to go numb, kind of a classic quasi near-death experience. And so you start having spiritual experiences. So Twitchell taught that technique. That's what Eckankar is based on. The word Eckankar comes from the Punjabi word from the Sikhs called Eckankar, which means one God. He changed the spelling slightly, and he was influenced by a guy named Julian Johnson. They were both born in Kentucky. Julian Johnson wrote a book called The Path of the Masters back in 1939, and that highly influenced Twitchell, and Twitchell plagiarized from that book extensively. So that's his thing.
Yeah. And so now Clem acknowledged the plagiarism of Twitchell?
You're going to like this one.
Yeah.
Clem says that when you go into the astral plane, there are these golden temples of wisdom, which has these sacred books. So Johnson tapped into that. Twitchell tapped into that. But ironically, Twitchell typed into also the anti-Semitic stuff, the typos, the misspellings. I guess they have that in the Golden Temple as well. It was a way of trying to obscure it. But he does admit that obviously there's a parallel. Well, I'll tell you how much he admitted. This is the most important thing. They withdrew the book, The Far Country. You can't find it anymore because it's so heavily plagiarized. They pulled it out of publication.
Gotcha. And I mean, if you really needed it, or if anybody needed it, they would just go to the Golden Temple and just maybe just check it out there, right?
Well, of course. Well, it's cheap, doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, I guess so. That works. And so we talked earlier that you think Harold Klemp, he believes in all the teachings and whatnot.
Yeah, very much so. You see, this is what's so interesting about it. I've noticed like two kinds of cult leaders. One that's just a complete scam. The guy just wants to make money. There's the other one who actually kind of believes this stuff. Because Klemp, as you remember, he was an Eckankar student. Working at the print office, really believed the teachings, and so I have no doubt that he believes it. I know he's aware of the scandals, and I know he's aware that Twitchell was kind of chronic liar. I know he's aware of that. But he whitewashes it because he says, well, the essence of the teachings are good and things like that. So yeah, Klump definitely believes it. No doubt in my mind about it.
Gotcha.
Or John Roger Hinkins of MSIA, I know deep down inside, he was bullshitting. I know it. He's a different cat, even though he taught some things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if he comes up to you and he's like, you know how to run a hustle with a cult, don't you? That's the same guy, right?
No, that was Jerry Mulvin.
Got it.
That was the guy. You see, it gets confusing. That's why I gave that lecture at Cal State Fullerton, because it branches off to this way, to that way, to this way. Jerry Mulvin, he's defunct because, he got that child porn stuff going on. He's gone. MSIA, John Roger, he died, but his successor, John Morton's still alive. And Gary Olson, he's still around. He's in the desert kicking people off his property. Mention my name.
Got it. Yeah, I didn't know Eckankar was that influential with religion.
Very much so. In fact, it's interesting you mentioned that. It's probably one of the most successful new religions of the 1960s. It's very surprising. It's lasted as long as it has. I mean, it's very impressive. And the people, let's be clear, let's be back up. Eckists are very nice people. I've met a lot of people that follow Eckankar. They're very nice, very sincere, very genuine. And it's not a very dangerous group. I mean, I don't think Eckankar is dangerous. It's not like Scientology. So,
yeah, I went to high school with an Eckist, and she was like one of the nicest, more probably one of the best people ever, right?
I totally agree. And so, what? Most people in Eckankar are really sincere and really genuine. And it works for them. They do the soul travel, they dream, they get the discourses. And, Klemp is relatively benign. He's not constantly trying to get your money, trying to, so it's okay. I don't have a bad feeling about Eckankar. Ironically, I don't.
Yeah.
Even though they've, hassled me in the past.
Well, maybe it's something karmic. Like you guys need to work something out that you didn't in a past life.
We need to just hug it out is what we need to do.
That's what I would do. But you know what? For our next interview, we'll have Harold, Klemp, and you, and then you just
Yeah, hands across America. We just, it's all good. Well, it's here's an irony. John Roger Hinkins tried to do the same with me. He tried to broker a deal where we would have a public announcement because, he was suing me over Peter McWilliams had written this book called Life 102, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You. And I had a copy of it on my website and I got sued for it's a long story, but he tried to have that, but it didn't work. It just wasn't the meeting of the minds, especially after he robbed my house. John Roger personally robbed my house and he made death threats. He wanted to kill my wife. So it's true story.
Yeah, that's hard to overcome.
Very hard.
So the leader of this group came to your house?
October 5th of 1984. I know it sounds unbelievable. There's a book. You can read it called Life 102 by Peter McWilliams, who's a follower of Eckankar, and they've co-authored many books with John Roger. It has a whole chapter about how he robbed my house. And I know he did because he's an idiot. He left all these notes and he took my wife's diary and he did all these notes on it and sent it to Eckankar, thinking that I would think Eckankar sued me, robbed my house. Eckankar's lawyer sent me the diary and it's all John Roger's handwriting. So I went on national TV. Geraldo Rivera used to have a TV show called Now It Can Be Told. And I went on national TV and said, John Roger robbed my house. He could sue my ass if he wanted to, but he did. And he's so stupid and so silly. And the reason he did, and it was my mistake, I'd known John Roger for a few years. And I was at his house one time. He had a mansion in Mandeville. And he asked me, he goes, Dave, with your research on Eckankar and all these other groups, do you have like a vault or lock it away? I'm like, no, I just leave it on boxes around the house. And he knew that. And so obviously when he came to Del Mar and broke in and robbed the house and took all this stuff. Funny.
That's crazy. You wouldn't think like a master of the universe would stoop to that level.
He did a lot of things that are really stupid. Well, he set up a front organization called the Coalition for Civil and Spiritual Freedom out of Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica. And he sent letters worldwide out against me saying that, you're going to like this one, that I was a gay FBI agent. Now, I don't mind the gay part because, my wife thought that was funny. The FBI agent was too far. That was like way too far. That's defamatory. And so he's trying to get people to go against me, worldwide. So he's, death threats and all sorts of stuff. Weird.
Yeah.
You know what? Like this one. I'll just add one other weird story. That's not the scariest group that I exposed. The scariest group was a guy named Satya Sai Baba. He's the most famous guru in India in the last 100 years.
Yes, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's very famous. He's now dead, but he claims to produce miracles out of his hand, vibhuti, rings. And all Well, we caught him on camera. I put him on the internet back 20 years ago. And he's a bad magician. I mean, really a bad magician. You and I would do better. And he turns out to be a massive pedophile, like one of the biggest pedophiles probably in the last 100 years. Hundreds of boys, okay? So like an idiot, I had a website, the Neural Surfer, and I had a little thing on Satya Sai Baba. Well, for a whole year, every single day for a whole year, I got death threats at my college on my phone. Every day, somebody said, they're going to kill you. I mean, they were really bad. And so, but he's dead now, and the scandals come out. BBC did a whole documentary on him.
Yeah. I think I
just,
saw that where he would do that thing like here, if I could do my hand like
yes.
that, and then there's going to be a Rolex in his palm.
Yes. But it wasn't a Rolex. It was always some cheap shit watch that you could have bought from the 99-cent store. It's all fake. He never produced. Like I got in trouble. I said, look, if he's really God, why not put out a Nissan Sentra out of your ear or the world's biggest diamond and feed the poor people in South India? It turns out that he does a thing called vibhuti, which is called sacred ash, which is really just dried, burnt cow dung. And we found out how he did it. He puts tablets between his fingers and then snaps it and comes out. And then with the trinkets of the thing, he's always carrying envelopes. And so he'd pull out a trinket or a watch underneath the envelope. And we caught him. You could do it on slow motion on camera. It's really bad. And they throw it. So he was a really bad magician. Think about somebody like David Copperfield or David Blaine or whatever that guy's name. They would have been insane in India. They would have gotten millions.
Yeah. I remember Sai Baba was a really big deal. I know, like I went to this Hindu temple, and they had like pictures of him right up. It's kind of like I don't know. He kind of went mainstream, right, for a bit.
He was the biggest guru in terms of name recognition in all of India.
Yeah.
He apparently when he died, they found that he had billions of dollars, or at least hundreds of millions of dollars. Very wealthy. And people liked him. I knew the president of the Sai Baba organization because I had done a book review on one of his books. And again, they're very nice people, except for the people that are trying to kill me. I mean, most of the people are very sweet,
Yeah.
And that's true with all religions. With all religions, are generally people are sincere and they want meaning.
Yeah. So kind of a big picture, how like religions never really form spontaneously. Would you say that there's always something pre-existing?
Oh, yeah, I like that. I like the way you're saying that. That's a very interesting. It's always kind of I came up with a word called genealogical disassociation. What that means is, let's take Judaism as an example. As you know, Jesus was a Jew. He died a Jew. He didn't die Catholic. He didn't die Christian. He was a Jew. And so now the question then arises, how does Christianity differentiate itself from Judaism? James, Jesus' brother, if you're Catholic, we'll say cousin, but if you're a Christian, is his brother. He believed that Jesus taught to the Jews. That was just Judaism. Paul, as you know, who never met Jesus in real life, but had that vision on the road to Damascus, he believed that he could teach to the Gentiles. What do? What differentiate? He basically makes Christianity not about law, more about faith, not about works. And in so doing, however, he disassociates a little from the core of what Jesus was really teaching, which was basically Judaism. And so what happens is, as you point out, it branches out of that. Then when you have that, then you have all these different groups in Christianity. I think J. Gordon Melton told me there are 600 different Christian denominations, and they all have their own little spin, especially after Luther makes the Bible the key source. because now you can have different interpretations. You know, you read the New Testament in English or whether in German, and then you can have your own spin on it. You know, was there really a Trinity, or is it just one God kind of thing? So you're right. Now, having said that, from an evolutionary perspective, I have this one little line. As you know, in evolution from Darwinian, you know, Darwin wrote On Origin of Species in 1859. It's a very simple principle, is that you need to make a copy of yourself before you die. I mean, that's just evolution very simply, right? Don't, our acid just it's gone. That little library of information, it goes extinct. Okay, fine. So the question is this: how do you survive this planet? Because this is a bad place. This is like Hunger Games. You know, everybody dies. There's suffering. There's pain. As a parent, you know, you're always worried about your kids. I'm always worried about my kids. And there's a lot of weirdo people out there, social media. Yeah. So what do? Well, I came up with this simple line. It's called ME, meaning equivalence, which means any meaning is better than no meaning, provided that such meaning, even if it's nonsense, makes you want to live an extra day. So we are pre-designed in a way, or evolved, to find meaning or purpose. Because if you don't, what the hell? It's like, okay, here's the example of the Hunger Games. I mean, if you look at the Hunger Games, the first movie, the first movie, how do you survive when everybody's got to kill each other? We're in carnivore land. Everybody eats something. You know, you and I are vegetarians, but we're still eating plants or whatever it may be. So the question then arises, what do you do in this planet? Well, you try to find purpose or meaning. Albert Camus had once said philosophically, a lot of people take this wrong. He says there's only one great philosophical question, is whether to commit suicide or not. And what he really meant was the opposite. How do you live in such a bad place? And therefore religion, I would suggest, or meaning, naturally evolved. And that's why religion will never go away. Doesn't matter what we do. Nietzsche can say all he wants. You know, very famously in the 19th century, in a book called Gay Science, God is dead. God resurrects in new forms. Eckankar, Scientology, Mormonism, whatever it may be.
Got it. So that, where is, like, I've heard that before. It's Heidegger, yeah?
From what? I mean, Heidegger said what about?
The meaning part. You kind of, I know Erhard, right? We're meaning making machines, and there's no inherent meaning.
Yeah, we're meaning.
What's that?
We're meaning seekers. We seek meaning wherever it may be, because it gives us a sense to live the extra day. And anybody who lives the extra day has a better chance to pass on genetic code. It's real simple. You know, that's what's great about Darwinian evolution. It's not very complicated, as T.H. Huxley said. You know, shit, I should have thought of this stuff. And the argument is so obvious in front of us. If you really look at life, and this is where Buddha actually was very insightful when he said the first noble truth, you know, all life is suffering, or dukkha. And he's right. Anybody who lives long enough knows it. I'm old. I mean, you know, you wake up every morning, you go, my back hurts. You know, I just went surfing for a few hours. That's why I'm all sunburned. And you know, all my old friends are all 66, 67, and that's all we do together. And we complain. You know, my elbow hurts. You know, I'm tired. You know, so.
Yeah, and with your with the oceanic metaphor, right? I think the latter part was what do they call it? The part of the title after the colon. I'm drawing a blank at that. Where we're seeking meaning, right? And I was trying to understand what the book is saying, that we're like computers, right? Or we're like neural nets, and that's that's where religion comes from. So I have that kind of.
No, you're on the right track. I mean, Mircea Eliade, who's a very famous professor of religion at the University of Chicago, he once said a very interesting line. He says, religion is not a state in consciousness. Religion is an element of consciousness. And it's really not religion, I would say, because, you know, Richard Dawkins will argue it's not really religion that we evolved for, but meaning. But guess what the most powerful meaning there is? It's religion, which Paul Tillich, the famous Protestant theologian, would say ultimate meaning. Anything for which there's ultimate meaning. And if you know anybody you've talked to, there are certain people that are religious about surfing. or religious about skateboarding or snowboarding, or religious about music.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever gets you through the day. And it just seems to me, to give kind of a kudo to religion, it's understandable. One weird example. I always am very impressed when some Christian, usually a fundamentalist, may have their kid get killed in a car accident by a drunk driver, or something bad happens. And to me, I want it out. It's just the most horrific thing I could think of. But they see a purpose. They say, well, Jesus, he's up with Jesus, or he's in heaven. And I admire that. That takes courage. I couldn't do that. And that's what religion offers people. So you can't really take it away. You could try to take it away, and it ain't going away. People will find another way to manifest it.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like, even after you research it and then you take on a higher critical view, right? Where it's still maybe even more relevant than it was before, right?
Yeah.
Or how is this happening? And we see the parallels or at least with me kind of coming full circle to be we see all these parallels with other religions, right? Even with Sanskrit texts in Christianity, there's the whole Homerian epics, right? And Christianity, and we see the same stories. You wonder if it's Jungian, in our head.
Yeah,
right?
archetype. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that's a good point you make. I think it's the human condition. And therefore, because there's going to be parallels, no matter if you're Chinese, Tibetan, living in Israel, you're going to have the human experience. And therefore, there's going to be a commonality. And like you said, it's interesting. Dawkins, in fact, my wife's writing a new book for Cambridge on memetic theory, meme theory. That's the idea that religion's like a virus, get infected by it. Well, as a Catholic, I was brought up Catholic, very strict Catholic, went to Catholic school, yada, yada, yada. I'm not Catholic in any intellectual sense. However, I've been infected. And, you're not getting rid of that virus that quickly. And you're going to think it through. And I love those books about the New Testament or the Old Testament. You get fascinated by religion. It's not going away. And I find my own kind of spiritual way of trying to get through life. I meditate and, I may be agnostic, in the sense of I'm stupid and don't know much, but you're still persisting, you're still looking for things.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that the whole mimesis thing, memetic, it just keeps reoccurring in other forms, right?
That's right.
Kind of like I alluded to. Have you heard of Dennis MacDonald and his thing where all the stories in the Bible, they've been done before, and you can trace it that you wonder, right? So I was talking to a guy named John McHugh, and he's talking about how in the stars, right, there's different constellations and they tell stories, right?
Right.
And in ancient Sumeria, you can look at this constellation and basically read the constellation. They tell a story, and how in the Bible, these stories are in the constellations, right? And a recurring thing is Polaris. Throughout time, we've thought of that's where you go when you die, Polaris, right? And so I'm thinking, I wonder if maybe the epics and the constellations of Sumeria kind of are like that golden library, right? They're both, that's where they get it, that they're not necessarily.
I understand. You're being empirical, although, we're not talking about the astral plane. What you're really saying is.
Well, I literally am, though, because it's in the stars. That's right.
Right. Well, they're very good. Very good. I back up. What I meant by astral is some other plane beyond the Earth and beyond the solar system and some other region. But what you're suggesting is it makes a lot of sense, because you can imagine what it must have been like with no electricity and no, screwed up smog. And every night the stars are telling you a story, and those stories have a common motif, like you mentioned. And they're going to be related to human beings and their existence, trying to explain it. And they're going to be passed on. And because there was no, let's say earlier, before there was writing, they had to have really good memories. And it was extremely important to transmit that oral tradition correctly, as accurately as you possibly can. And that's going to be influencing all sorts of people. So you're right. And so that meme theory is a very interesting idea because it explains a couple things. For instance, the religion or any religion doesn't have to be true. It just has to be willing to try to transmit itself. So for an example, Christianity is the biggest religion in the world. Okay. Let's say 2.8 billion or 3 billion. Then you have Islam. Okay. Now, if you look at Judaism, which is really the atomic structure, you don't have Christianity nor Islam without Judaism's core, right? 2007. How many followers of Judaism are there? About 15 million. 15 million compared to billions of Christians. So what's the difference? We already know the answer. I always do this in my class. I said, how many people have ever been touched by a Christian? And I got to be careful. I don't mean that way, but I mean touched by a Christian. You know, like, have you accepted Jesus, your personal Lord and Savior, or handed you a New Testament? Everyone raises their hand. I said, how many people have ever been touched by a Jew? I mean, in the sense of knocking on your door, it's Rabbi Leibowitz. You know, I got bagels, I got lox. You know, I get you circumcised. You know, that doesn't happen. See? So what's the difference? Islam spreads, Christianity spreads. Judaism is not interested in spreading that way. It never has been. Therefore, it's a core religion. Very tight religion. No, don't get me wrong. But and that's what meme theory does. It explains that. I think pretty well.
Perpetuates. Yeah. Yeah. So you wonder if we look at religion, like, in its evolution, right? The ones that survive, right? They adapt.
Right.
You wonder if it's evolutionarily advantageous to believe in a hereafter, right? Because that's one of the major
selling points.
Do you think it aids in survival on its own?
Yeah, let's play it out. The two biggest religions, Islam and Christianity, do what Freud would call eros and thanatos. They offer you two things. One, eternal life, heaven, or something really bad, eternal hell. It's kind of like, just think of a chain letter. You know, you get the chain letter.
Yeah.
Now, if the chain letter shows up in your e-box and says, well, I'm just a chain letter and, you know, can you pass me on? That doesn't do anything. But if the chain letter says, if you pass this on, I'm going to give you, $5 million, or you're going to get a car or a girlfriend or whatever. Or if you don't send it, you're going to get in a nasty car accident. Now, I have really smart people who send me this crap because they get scared or they get attracted. Now, think about Christianity. There's a lot of people scared of hell, and there's a lot of people that want to go to heaven. So you got eros, the desire, the nice thing, and then thanatos, or death. That sells. That's why I would argue that those two religions are very successful, because they either scare the shit out of you or they give you heaven.
Got it. So nothing about a hereafter in and of itself.
Yeah, it's just, all it is just the promise of something better. You don't even have to give them a hereafter. Just say you're going to have something better. That's what attracts people.
Got it.
Especially if your life's not going very good right now. See, that's the other thing. Marx, in his critique of religion, had made that argument. If you go along, he always says, religion's the opiate of the masses. What he really meant by that, though, there's a longer sentence to it. What he really meant was people do not think about their own interest right now. They delay it because they think, well, I'll suffer now. Like in India, the whole caste system was pre-designed in a way to keep you in your station so you don't protest and go out of your mind. And so Marx argued that's the problem, because if people would wake up to realize that maybe there is no afterlife, well, they would make this life better.
That's interesting. Where do you think it's counter survival to the believer?
No, it's a very interesting question.
It's pro survival to the idea itself.
Yeah, right. Well, that's interesting, because memes don't care about whether it's true or bad. All they care about is being passed on. But let's back up for a second. Again, if it gives somebody an overarching purpose or meaning, it's going to get you through the day. So if I believe that I'm a sinner, but Jesus has saved me, no matter how bad my life may get or bad, it kind of keeps me going. I mean, Catholicism's brilliant on confession. You know, as little kids, we had to go to confession and we'd go into the thing and say whatever sins we did. The cool thing about it was, especially my party friends, is after they go to confession, they go, woo! I got a whole week, I can party. Then I'll go back to confession and I'm saved, right? That's the argument. It's very powerful. You know, Christianity, as you know, as an evangelical in your childhood, that's really a cool thing that you don't earn it yourself. It's your faith that Jesus has died for your sins, right? And resurrected from the dead. He's taken on all the sins of, that's just, God, psychologically, you can see why people in prison convert. I get it. I mean, it's really quite sweet. Doesn't mean it's true. Nobody wants to say that because that gets them upset.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of provides like I don't know where I think Jung talks a lot about the Jesus as symbolizing like the everyman, right? So you kind of see yourself as Jesus. I don't know. It's hard to understand. Like there has to be something more profound to it, right? Like Jesus is dying for your sins, and I guess I'm not precluding it being actually and factually true, right? But do you think there's especially something about him dying, or like something that?
Well, that goes back. If you look at him dying, as you pointed out earlier, that goes back thousands and thousands of years, where we used to do animal sacrifices, when they used to sacrifice the virgin, the young boy, you know, get the crops to grow. The whole idea of giving up something to gain something. So the ultimate sacrifice is God, as his son, is willing to pay the price for all of humankind's corruption, you know, given the Adam and Eve story. Because really the Adam and Eve story is the key, you're right. Because remember, in the Adam and Eve story, in Genesis, it's the snake. This is, nobody wants to hear this, but the snake tells the truth. The snake says, look, dude, you eat from that fruit, the tree of knowledge, God's worried because you'll become like God. Well, it's true, because there's a second tree. Everybody forgets. The second tree is the key. The second tree is the tree of everlasting life. So once they eat of the tree of knowledge, they become aware. Now, God is very fearful. He says, oh my God, now their eyes have been awakened. They could eat of the second tree and they can become like God. Now that I would make a sociological analysis there. And I would simply say, this is an analysis of polytheism. This is when Judaism was living at a time of multiple gods and multiple competition. So it's a way of having their own God being protected. It's a very human story, but nobody wants to read that part. But that's exactly it. So what do you do if you've committed this incredible atrocity of eating some fruit off a freaking tree, and everybody's got original sin, right? They're all going to be born with like cursed. So God comes down and he says, oh, I absolve you. But here's the key. You have to accept their faith. It's like somebody, you know, washing your car, or somebody doing other things for you. It's very sweet. I get it. I mean, I really do. But here's the punchline: is you know, you're a smart man, you're intellectual, you're thinking things. It's just the plausibility of it, that is the believability of it, becomes less and less and less the more you know about science, the more you see the world in a different way. That's the point.
Well, you wonder if it was intended to be actually be perceived as factual, the Eden story, like it actually physically happened.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
you're right. I don't think the Hebrews, that basically oral tradition of the story, I don't think they're not like stupid like us who read it literally. Of course, we don't even read Hebrew. We read the English translation and then we read that literally. I think you're absolutely right. It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's totally a metaphor.
I've heard it pointed out that anytime in the Bible it's mentioned, eat of the tree of this, it's always clearly a metaphor. You're not actually eating of the tree of that. You're getting the byproduct of something, right? Right. Where this is the only one that you can literally eat and survive on, right? So I'm inclined to think that it's meant as metaphor, but that's a good point where, like, the serpent says, you're not going to die on that day, right? And right, the Lord says you will die on that day.
And they wouldn't have died if they were allowed to eat of the tree of everlasting life. So what does God do? He puts a flame of fire in front of the tree and a cherubim, some kind of a little, kid or angel, and kicks them out of the garden. Why does he kick them out of the garden? Because he doesn't want to eat of the tree. Now, if you read this, you go, oh my God, God's got some real jealous issues. No.
Yeah.
This is just polytheism, trying to save their one God versus all the other gods. No, we don't want competition. It's from that perspective, then you could read the story and go, oh, that kind of makes sense. I see what's going on here. But that takes a different kind of way of looking at it. And I'm sure my evangelical fundamentalist Christian friends will think I'm going to hell with eyes open because I'm not reading it correctly. But as I always tell my students, no language is literal. This is really an interesting point, because language itself is merely a sound wave for some other object that's not in your present moment. So all language is never literal. And therefore, all language on this level is metaphorical. And there's a very famous Zen koan, which I like to quote, where the Zen master looks at his disciple and he takes his finger and he points to the moon and looks at the moon. Here's the moon. Well, the disciple, being an idiot, just looks at the finger.
Yeah.
And that's literalism. That's fundamentalism. You're looking at the finger, but it's pointing to something, but you're not looking at to where it's pointing. And therefore, anybody who reads anything literally is being dishonest, because everything you read must be interpreted. Everything has a hermeneutic. All we're debating, or that's why you have 600 different denominations. That's why you have thousands of different religions, because everybody has a different interpretation. But everybody thinks, of course, as you know, thinks they have the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do they say? Words don't mean things. People mean things, right? That this word, I think it's funny when people say, well, the true definition of this word is this, right? And sometimes I'll sarcastically say, well, you clearly don't know the true meaning of the word prescriptivism, right? Which is, oh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, got it. I kind of skipped for a second. But prescriptivism, meaning there's something special in this word that it just inherently means that thing, right?
Right. And it never does.
Yeah.
All words are contextual.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein, the very famous philosopher, pointed that out. He tried to make it literal in his book in 1919. He tried to come up with a perfect language to explain the Tracticus. And then later, 30, 40 years later, he was, language is like a game. It's all a context. And what do you mean within that context? But you're right. People love to do that to you. I have the right definition. It's and when I was young, people would do that when they would go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, because, Britannica was the best encyclopedia. Yeah. And you'd have to bow to it. If it's in the encyclopedia, it's got true. Well, guess what? A lot of it's not right.
Yeah, I remember that they have glaring errors in the Encyclopedia Britannica, or some people go to the dictionary as if that sorts anything out, right? This is the true definition, right?
Right. Not realizing it was human beings trying to find the meanings and the history of it. Like the Oxford English Dictionary, very interesting. But they didn't know exactly what the meaning was and when it was first. What's the etymology of this term, and there was different variations of it. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, very true. So, going back to the Eden story, do you think that there was some meaning with the serpent telling the truth that's kind of hidden, or maybe not so much?
No, it's interesting about that. It's an interesting point. I think the serpent represents, in a weird way, science. That is the quest for knowledge, and the quest to be an individual, and the quest to think for yourself. And you could look at the Garden of Eden story. This is going to sound really weird. I did this in Catholicism when I was teaching Catholic religion at Chaminade. I said, And I'm not saying it's true or not, but as a metaphor, I said, it's almost as if Adam and Eve were like apes and that they were not autonomous thinking for themselves. And then all of a sudden they eat of the tree of knowledge. It's almost like an evolutionary thing where the brain gets a little bigger and they start to think for themselves and they become Homo sapiens. And I say this precisely because if you read Genesis, God then curses the woman and says, you will have pain at child labor. Now, what causes pain in human beings to have pain is the big head. That's what's, and the shoulders. You know, other animals do not go through the same pain that human females do. I look at it as a metaphor for a time where we were innocent and didn't know shit until we grew up, and now we have to pay the responsibility to think, to be thinkers. It takes courage. It takes guts. So I look at it as this positive story, this story of moving away from being a cult member, doubting God.
Interesting. Yeah, I've not heard that before. So, do you think that, or at least partially, was the intended message, or we're supposed to like?
Yeah, that's I like. Yeah, you know what? The great thing about the Hebrews, and the great thing about Judaism, and the great thing about all my Jewish friends, is they're very smart people, very intelligent, and very bright. And as you know, the way they interpret the Torah, I mean, they debate left and right what it means. And there's all sorts of different variations of what it means. So I would imagine there must have been at the time lots of debates about it means this means this means that. So it wasn't a unified, you know, we all agree. See, that's one of the things you've probably indicated this with your interviews. There isn't a unified version of Christianity. That doesn't exist. And so I don't think an early version of Genesis exists. That is, you know, one interpretation.
Yeah. You wonder, like, how it's, if there's a guy that sat down and said, okay, this is the story, right? Or it morphed over time, or
it gets mixed over time. As you know, Genesis, there's a whole historical thing about there's two different versions that collided and got compiled together, one earlier, one later, from different geographical regions. And they kind of put them together. And, you know, as you know, they're two different stories. They contradict. You know, animals get created first, then humans get created. The whole thing's contradictory because there's two different versions. But I think you're right. I think there's an oral tradition, and it was debated. There's no doubt it was debated. You know, people had different variations of it. And then, of course, it gets codified. You know, it gets written down. As Socrates, you know, apparently in the mouthpiece of Plato, debated. He said, don't write things down because it's very difficult to change your mind because now you think it's like real. Just we talked about Britannica. And same thing happens with Christianity. Once it gets codified, you know, in the 4th century, and this becomes the canon, you can't debate it anymore. You're stuck. And it's been a big mistake. I would call it the huge mistake of Christianity. Because I think the farther back you go to the origins of Christianity, or even Judaism, you will find out it's much messier. It's much more, there's maybe vagaries, and people have different ideas, and it's just it's a mess in a way. And they try to clean up the mess. I've noticed this with religion. Just like when somebody dies and you try to say, you know, like I love my dad. He was an alcoholic, but, you know, he gave it up for the last 5 years of his life. But I've been to some funerals where, you know, the guy was a jerk. Okay. The guy was just a terrible dad. Not my dad, but some guy. And the eulogy is like, oh, he was a good guy. You know, he paid for people's drinks, and, you know, he was okay. He was a heroin addict, but he beat me only a few times, you know, and it becomes whitewashed. And there's a word called hagiography, or what it's called, the embellishment of a person's story, where you polish it up. And Christianity has been polished. You know, it's just so much polishing.
Yeah, that's really true. Hagiography, where you make it look good in retrospect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was 3, maybe, really young, and before I could read, and I made pictures, and I gave a eulogy, and maybe I shouldn't say who it was, but he was kind of a bit of abusive, but I only knew him after he had, you know, dementia. So right. And I gave it because probably other people couldn't really give a proper eulogy, right?
Yeah, right.
And
And you probably saw the good in him, right? You probably said something nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I like bringing this up because when I look at the four Gospels, and I do this all the time, and I look at the resurrection stories, which contradict each other left and right. How many people showed up, and was it an empty tomb, and what angel, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I always tell people, I said, go read the Gospel of John, and look at Mary Magdalene, and look at how she reacts when she sees the empty tomb. She thinks the body's been stolen. She thinks, I want to go take care of it. Now I tell them, freeze frame that moment. This woman does not believe in the resurrection of Jesus, even though he apparently taught it for 3 years, which means he was either a bad teacher with bad students who didn't listen to the message, or he never taught it. And she just loves Jesus no matter what. So I make this argument. I said, in fact, I made a little film about it. I said, how many Christians today would be Christian if they found out that Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead? And any Christian I know of, oh my God, he means he's a liar, and C.S. Lewis would say, oh, he's full of shit. I'm thinking, you're a lousy Christian. I mean, a real good Christian like Mary Magdalene, she loves Jesus no matter what. That's a very impressive story. But see, that over time gets lost. It's almost like the secret part of that gospel. They did not believe he resurrected from the dead. He apparently didn't teach it, because if he did a lousy job. Because they would have known. He said he was going to rise from the dead. Yay. First time they hear it, I think it's in the Gospel of Luke, maybe Matthew. The women run to tell the disciples, guys, Jesus is resurrected from the dead. You know what they say? Nonsense. That's the first response. Bullshit. Huh?
That's interesting.
The Christianity that we have today is not the Christianity that must have been then. And that I get from the New Testament. That's me going biblical. I'm not even going extra, Gnostic, Gospel of Thomas, or, the secret gospel of Judas of Iscariot. I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Where it kind of makes sense of the Magdalene tradition, right? With the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, like, don't be attached. And it seems so zen that she's not attached to the outcome of what happens, right? She thinks the body's stolen, which was very common. And back in the day, like, he's in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb.
His own tomb. It's like you and I having our own private garage, and Jesus or some cult leader dies, and we bring him over to North Hollywood, and I put him in my own private garage. I mean, come on. I mean, just from a different perspective, And then it mysteriously opens up.
Well, yeah, I was talking with Robert M. Price, and we kind of touched on swoon theory, and that whole motif about you're in a rich person's tomb, people are going to raid it, right? Probably pretty quickly. And people were often thought to have died that didn't.
That's right.
And then so they were resurrected, and maybe they would come and kidnap the person as well, right? And help themselves to the stuff inside. So it was a common thing to happen.
That's right.
And so it would make sense that Mary Magdalene would think, well, it's more likely that the body was stolen. Let's go find the body.
You're absolutely right. In the Gospel of Mark, the first, probably the earliest of all, that's exactly the Jewish authorities think the body's been stolen. That's why they want to have people around the tomb to protect it. Now, the weirdest part, and I think it's in Matthew, maybe Mark, I'm not sure, but the weirdest part, people always tell me, well, Jesus is the only person that ever resurrected from the dead. I go, no, go read the New Testament. When he dies and resurrects, there's a whole little passage about how the dead saints rise from the grave and walk to Jerusalem. And I'm thinking to myself, no historian ever mentioned that the dead, it's like the land of the zombies. Like, what are they going to get, the In-N-Out burger? What's going on here? And the funny thing about it, nobody talks about that because it's so weird.
Yeah.
So that's you can tell that these stories later on get embellished and whitewashed.
Yeah, you wonder, like, what were they trying to say with that? Well,
I think what they're trying to say is that he was so powerful that this is an indication for other people that they too will also resurrect and you'll have eternal life with Jesus. So obviously somebody wrote that years later to kind of add to the story.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's interesting. You think about it. Nothing was written down about 50, 60, 70 years until after he's dead. Paul's the earliest writings we have, and he never met the guy in a language that Jesus most likely didn't speak. I mean, how accurate is this going to be? And as Bart points out, these aren't even the original Gospels. Luke didn't write Luke, and Matthew didn't write Matthew, and John didn't write John. He has a whole book called Forged, when he explains that these are forged. That is, we're claiming they're written by this guy to make him sound more efficacious, more authoritarian. So I go back to my point. We just don't know much.
Yeah. And then there's like the earliest gospel we know of, right? Marcion. And I think it's interesting how, like, some people say that he wrote it. And he says, are you familiar with the Gospel of Marcion?
Yes, a little. Yeah. You have to jar my memory a little.
Yeah, so he's the first guy. He came up with putting the epistles together. He had a gospel.
Right.
And people said that he wrote it, although a lot of it, the Gospel of Marcion, runs counter to his theology.
Right.
So it's funny, straight out of the gate, the first gospel that we know of, like from the very beginning, it's like, oh yeah, that passage says that. But what it really means, right, is the exact opposite, right? And like that tells me that he didn't write it. He got it from somewhere else because he has to come up with apologetics in his own work, right?
Exactly. Nobody would do that. That's called there's a word called ideological work where you have a discrepancy and you try to, rationalize it away. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's it's fun. I really enjoyed, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed biblical studies. It's fascinating. Mm-hmm. But what you do realize is people are saying a lot of stuff they don't know anything about. Not the biblical scholars, but just the general populace just doesn't, they don't read it. I always tell my students, I think Isaac Asimov said this. He said, if you want to lose your faith, read the Bible very carefully. Because when you read it, you go, there's a lot of weird stories there.
Yeah.
If you read it in that kind of the way that people tend to read it, it's somewhat woodenly.
And we could say, and then if you want faith back again, read higher critical books, right? Books on higher criticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I remember taking a class when we studied Rudolf Bultmann, and then we started to read, the redaction criticism, and it was fantastic. It was so interesting. It's really the best thing. The best thing anybody can do, really, is to read the thing yourself, and then try to do, like you said, higher biblical criticism to find out, what did they know at that time. It's really good stuff.
Yeah. And just like, you come up with stuff that, it doesn't preach well, like the Mary Magdalene. You would think that
yes,
that makes so much sense. Yeah.
It's sweet. I mean, it's, and I do it in my class. I always say, I say, I don't believe any Christians today. I don't believe them. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, here's my analogy. I tell this to girls or women in my class. I said, imagine you have a boyfriend who loves you if you're only perfect. If you mess up and, you get food in your face or you get fat, he dumps you. But what about a boyfriend that says, I love you no matter what, in any condition? You get fat, you start yelling at me, you're screaming at me. I just love you no matter what. I said, that's Mary Magdalene, right? There's a dead body. She thinks she's dead. She thinks the body's been moved. She wants to take care of it. She doesn't believe in the resurrection. That's impressive. Christians today, well, I love Jesus. He's perfect. He's God. He's doing. That's not impressive. There's nothing impressive about it. That's what I realized. And that's the humanity that it gets kind of sad, because that would make us a little nicer to each other if we had that kind of understanding, to love people when they're unlovable.
That's really profound, where it's like people talk about God loving you unconditionally.
Yeah.
But as you're
perfect, or I won't love them.
Yeah, that I was talking to a guy named Sean McCraney, who he has his own beliefs, right? Where he expressly doesn't believe in the omnis, right? And the omniscient, omnibenevolent, and what else is it? omnipotent, right?
Right,
Which makes a lot of sense because, like, you know, the, what do they call it? Problem of evil, right?
Yeah, of course. That's what David Hume pointed out. Yeah, you're right.
And yeah, but people really have this strong reaction if you reject the omni traits, right?
That's right.
Because then it's I don't know, I can't really express it, but
it upturns what people
yeah.
want is certainty, absolute certainty, and what you've indicated is that it's uncertain. You know what I mean? It's a little more variable. It's a little more not as clear cut, and people don't want that. They want absolute certainty.
Yeah.
They want dogma. That's why dogmas. That's why orthodoxy comes around. People want. They don't want to start thinking. Well, that's why they don't like science. I mean, really, science is the great thing about science is it's always potentially wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just always, but that's how it works. It doesn't work because it's right. It works because it's willing to admit to being wrong. If it doesn't, it's not science. And that's why we have better iPads, better iPhones, better air conditioners. You know, we don't just bow to it. You know, we didn't bow to Steve Jobs in 2007. Your iPhone is perfect. It's only got 4 gigabytes, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where you wonder if, why is religion like that? I mean, because it doesn't have the same rules, or I guess if it was science, it would be science, right? That
You're on the right track. Exactly. Well, Peter Berger is a really good sociologist. He's now dead. He wrote a book in 1979 called The Heretical Imperative. And he says in today's, there's 3 options. First is the dogmatic one, the fundamentalist position. The second one, he argued, is the reductive position. And the first one is deductive. He uses deductive. Then the other one is, he argues, the reductive one, which means you basically reduce all of religion, like Freud did, to like sexual variables, or like Carl Sagan did about near-death experiences. You're just having birth memories of your obstetrician, you know, real reductionistic. But Peter Berger says in today's era, we have to be the third one, which is inductive, which means uncertain. Like we're not absolutely, we don't know. So we've got to learn. We've got to keep open-minded. Religion seems to really appeal to people that want the deductive. That is the absolute certainty. Some people, Dawkins route, reductive. But Berger says we should go to the inductive position because, we don't know much. We should be open-minded, but not stupid. But that doesn't work for people because that means like you got to think. That's what Nietzsche meant by the Übermensch. That's what he meant. He meant that what do you do in a world where ultimately you cannot have objective meaning, where you have to figure it out for yourself? He says that takes a different kind of human being. He called it the Übermensch, or the Superman, or the Superwoman. He says most people don't have that courage. That's what he meant by we killed God too early. It's as if we were 12 years old and we killed our parents and didn't know it. How do you live? How do you live with that? And in a world like you and I live in now, my younger generation, you may have picked this up as well, they're agnostic. It's the weirdest thing. 30 years ago, when we talked about evolution, half my class would go out of their mind. Creationism, intelligentism. Now, almost every one of my students are not religious. They're agnostic or either atheist or don't really care, which has been a big change. And I think that's technology. I think we are so technologically sophisticated now, especially in light of the internet, that people live in an uncertain world. They don't know what to believe. As you know, fake news, good news, bad news.
Yeah. Yeah, when it comes to religion, it's easy to kind of go full circle where like you believe it, like strict, like it's spot on. We believe in this perfect deity and everything is right and we're certain. And then when it's kind of shown that that's not exactly how it is, then you like have complete contempt for it and then go full circle. And then, you're one of those atheists on a keyboard that's, on the forums in all caps, right? That maybe
Exactly. It's an interesting point. Almost like, yeah, you could go. Well, like you had like a really nice girlfriend. Okay, let's imagine you really loved her, and everything was great, and then she breaks up with you, or you find out something bad about her, and now you hate her. But like you're suggesting, that's kind of a yin yang kind of thing, and it's not really the appropriate way to do it. I mean, there's a more appropriate saying to say, well, there's some things about the religion that were pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things I didn't really like about it, and you become more discriminating. Of course, then they'll accuse us of being cafeteria Catholics. You know, we just pick out our food. But I think that's what you have to do. I mean, in a world of this flooded with so much information.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't get the dig, right? Cafeteria Catholic. Like, well, yeah. I mean,
yeah, right. Like I'm supposed to believe in the priest, the pedophile over here,
exactly.
Altar boys.
Like, well, yeah, but I mean, I don't like the anti-gay stuff, so I'm just not going to get it. So, I don't, but yeah, I mean, like, well, yeah. So, I mean, I don't like you're like you're a spiritual vegan, right? So you just I can't eat that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you wonder what you can't. I mean, that's something that I don't understand. Like, if you're gonna have a religion, it's either all or nothing. You can't take some and leave some.
That's right.
But people do all the time. They clearly do, and you clearly can, right?
Absolutely, and that's being a normal human being.
What are they trying to say by that? Like,
well, what they're trying to say is that we're not following the religion correctly. That's fundamentalism, right? A fundamentalist Muslim would say the Sufis are not real Muslims. The Sunnis think the Shiites are not really Muslim, right? Christians who are Protestant look at Catholics, especially with the Pope, as the Antichrist. They're not really Christian because you haven't accepted Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. I mean, I happened one time I was hitchhiking back in the day when you could hitchhike. Now, of course, hitchhiking is another way of committing suicide. But when I was young, we did hitchhike. And this guy, we were going to go surfing because the waves were good, right? And I was with my friend Joe Maria, and the guy gets us in this truck, and he goes, "Hey, you okay with Jesus?" We go, "Yeah, we're Catholic. You know, we go to Notre Dame High School. Yeah, we love Jesus." "No, that's not what I meant. Have you accepted Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior?" And we go, "Well, what do you mean by that?" You know, it's kind of weird for us at the time. And he says, "I'm not going to drive you to the beach unless you accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, because otherwise I feel like I'm driving you to hell." Now, you got to remember, the surf was good. So we said, okay, we got in the back of the car, you know, whatever. And, you know, it's all good. But that's how they see Catholics. I get this all the time. You know, Catholics are not really Christian. And Protestants, you know, Baptists look at other evangelicals, like the Pentecostals, as not real Christian. Everybody's like tagging each other. Why? Because they want to feel like they have the truth. And you, of course, and I don't have the truth. And that's why they get upset when you pick and choose and select. Which means you're using your critical mind and they have abdicated theirs. They would rather have somebody. That's what it comes to cults. Now we're going full circle back to the cults. I would rather have somebody else do the thinking for me. The Bible is good enough. It's sufficient. The Quran is sufficient. Well, no, it's not. It's obviously not. And the argument means you have to be a critical thinker. And I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah. And it's a bit uncomfortable because you go to knowing all of it to basically kind of knowing none of it, right? Especially when it comes to higher criticism, that, like you had mentioned, most people don't know a thing when it comes to Christianity. Right. But I wonder if, to be honest, even the prominent scholars really don't really know anything either. Because the more, like, the closer you look at Christian origins, we don't know, right? Like, and I mean, even the terms, they don't suit us, right? So it's almost like we go from the macro level to the, what is it? I'm drawing a blank, but, you know, like subatomic, we don't know how those things work, right?
You're right.
And on that level, like the words that we use, like Gnostic, they don't suit us because there wasn't Gnosticism, and even there's so much variation within it. And it's just like, I remember I was thinking, well, what was the first Christianity like? And a lot of scholars says there likely wasn't one. And like, who wrote these books? Who wrote the Gospels? We don't know, right? And what does it mean? We don't know. That's very uncomfortable, right? But if you've got a guy who's like the universe incarnate, right, you can just stop thinking about it, right? It doesn't have to trouble you.
That's right. And you make an interesting observation that the smarter you get, in a weird way, the stupider you get. And I think that's true, because if you know enough, you realize how much you don't know. Mm-hmm. Nicholas of Cusa, this is ironic, he's a Catholic cardinal of the 15th or 14th century. He made a very interesting argument. He had this book in Latin called Unlearned Ignorance. And he said, look, the smarter you get, you learn your ignorance. You learn how stupid you are. And I've read lots of books, I always do this. I got a PhD and 2 MAs, and I go, dude, I'm still stupid. There's one difference. When I was 4, I was stupid. I'm 66. I'm still really stupid. The only difference is that I can articulate how stupid I am. When I was young, I was like, right? And I think that's true. And Einstein said the same thing. He says, he's considered one of the greatest physicists of all time. And he says, the reason is because I know where all my mistakes are. I know where people are making the blunders. And I know my own blunders. It doesn't matter. Human beings are so arrogant about their knowledge, and especially in an area where you become an expert. You become an expert because you know how much you don't know, and you acknowledge that, and you confess that. But when you don't know very much, this is the ironic thing. When you don't know very much, you act very certain and very absolute. You've seen this in politics. God, I don't want to go there.
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger. So you wonder if, the ultra-religious or like evangelical types, if there's a bit of Dunning-Kruger there, and that they're kind of like the opposition, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus or, or trying to be offensive. Maybe I am, but I apologize if anybody's offended. That you don't want to get into the whole evolution thing, or understand how gender works or whatnot, right? Because you want it simple, right? And you don't want to go further down the Dunning-Kruger path because you know where that leads already, right?
That's right. It leads to doubt. It leads to doubt. Like a good example is you mentioned it briefly about physics. Let's take physics, okay? You break down, let's take a tree, okay? A tree's made of cells. Cells are made of molecules. Molecules are made of atoms. Okay, we break down the atom. What do we find? We find, let's take the simplest atom, hydrogen. You find a 1 electron. You find a proton and neutron. Okay, cool. But you break that down. What do you find? Quarks, okay? 6 in number, Murray Gell-Mann's famous for. Break that down even farther. You find out that 99.9%, keep going, is empty space within the atom. Then you break that down, and the latest theory is, is string theory, M theory. What does it mean? It means nobody even freaking knows what an atom is. Nobody ultimately knows what it is. And once you get that, if you can't even explain to me what a piece of paper is, ultimately, of its atomic structure, its string theory structure, then what the hell do I know about some magnificent God that transcends my comprehension? Nicholas of Cusa says the unattainable is attained by its unattainment, which means the smarter you get stupid and you confess to it. I had read a little book on this called Blissful Ignorance. It's not that you bury your head in the sand. It's that you realize that you're never going to know, ever, as far as I can tell. But I got to be careful, because then if I say you can never know, that's too absolute, and then I become a dogmatic.
Yeah. That's I hear a lot of Gnosticism in that, isn't it? Where it's kind of, or maybe even like Dharmic thought, right? Where it's kind of like you're going back to emptiness, right? To being blank, right?
Right.
And I can kind of see on like with the atomic metaphor that when we're talking about religion, that the smaller you get, right, the less sense it really makes, right? That when we go to the electron, to explain to somebody that it's a particle and a field at the same time. It's two contradictory things,
Right.
and we don't know how that works, right?
That's right.
And so, I mean, if you were a evangelical, you'd be like, "Oh, that's absurd. We know how it works. It's this, right?" But
right.
it's just to say, well, it's not that simple, right?
No, that's
And
good.
yeah, like strings, haha, we have no proof of that. Well, I mean,
The mathematical structure of 11 dimensions, we don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some brilliant guys, but that's why Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty is such a good one. You cannot know simultaneously the momentum and the position of any subatomic material. That's the reason Einstein hated it, of course, because he didn't want to believe in a universe that he couldn't objectify, couldn't absolutely know. But the smartest people in the world you've ever met are always the ones who confess how little they know. Feynman, probably the most famous physicist of the last 50 years. He always used to say, I always feel stupid. I always feel stupid. I mean, here's this brilliant guy, Nobel Prize winner. And he goes, I always feel, but that's why he's smart, because you can learn more. Socrates, of course, is famous for saying, he went around, people go, oh, you're so smart. And he goes, well, all I know is I don't know. And people go, oh, you're smart because you don't know. But if you can confess that, then you can learn something new. But if you don't, then it's the Bible's true, Quran's true, the Guru Granth's true, whatever book's true, and that's the problem. I think that's probably that's killing this planet in terms of politics. As you know, nobody talks to each other. Everybody's got siloed each other away. You're either listening to Fox News or you're on CNN, and nobody's talking to each other, and everybody's got it's got to be Trump, it's got to be Biden. Nobody's like, come on, can we just talk? Can we be wrong?
Yeah, it's about being wrong and wanting to be right. That you wonder why we want to be right. Is it just? I mean, it seems like a drug, and we have to get our fix, right?
Yeah.
Where
especially males. Like I noticed this on the internet. Most of the fights on the internet are a bunch of dudes that like they can't fight it out in some kind of wrestling match or boxing. So, dude, I'm gonna spam you. I get that a lot myself on the internet. You start getting like. And it's a competitive thing. I'm sure it's from an evolutionary past where we used to want to be the alpha male or whatever it may be, but it's so stupid. It's silly. It's like, I guess when you get older, you get like that. If I was younger, I'd probably still be like fighting it out.
Age there you go. What was that?
Age can make you mellow out because you realize you can't do very much. Like I was out surfing today at 40th Street in Newport. It's a jetty. It's a really good wave. But you get a bunch of young guys, like 20, 25, and they're good, and you got some old geezers, like 66. You're going, hey, dude, and I can't even compete. Like, I don't even care anymore. But if I was 25, I'd be tenacious. And I think that happens with religion as well. It's a young person's sport. It seems they want to be right. And I think that comes down to competition. Nobody ever knocks on your door. No religion knocks on your door and go, hey, I just want to tell you, my religion sucks. You don't need to join it. Wouldn't you love that?
Yeah. Very true. Well, they say Unitarians, I might have the joke, Unitarian Universalists knock on your door and want to learn about your religion. Right?
That's sweet.
But yeah, it's a wonder, like, since being right is so maladaptive, why we want it.
Well, it's in the scarcity of resources. This is what Darwin pointed out. When there's a scarcity of resources, there's going to be competition. And therefore, it's the perception of the scarcity of resources that causes this competition. And I think when people get more confident or at least have some success in their life, they're more willing to share, they're more willing to give up things. And I think it's the tenacious fight. Maybe they don't have the social stats. One of the things we talked about cults earlier, one of the weirdest things I've ever noticed is that I have noticed that people stay in cults even if they know it's a fraud, if they have a certain social status in that movement. I mean, I've talked to people who are very high up, let's say in MSIA or Eckankar, or even Sai Baba, and they know, bad things about it. And so I ask them, why do you stay in the group? And they go, well, I'm the vice president, I'm a speaker, people look up to me, I'm an 11th initiate. They look at me like, wow, and they don't want to give that up. status, social status, is probably why people fight over religion. It makes them feel like better than the other guy. You know, I may be a front counter guy at 7-Eleven, but damn it, in my church, I'm the minister or whatever it may be.
That's a good point. And just as a aside, Eckankar has different levels.
That's one of its selling points. There are about 12. Secretly, there's probably 14 initiations. The first one is in the dream state. So if you dream about the Eckankar master or whatever, the second one you got to pay for, okay, or if you donate money. Then they got third initiations, fourth initiations, and in Eckankar, once you get up to like 6 or 7, the guys that are second or third initiates look at you like, wow, he's a 6th initiate. He's got knowledge. It's kind of like the Masons, you know, like 33rd degree or whatever. And it's status. Scientology does this really well. You know, they got all these different levels. And the higher the level, the more status you have in the group. And people really, you know, bow to you. They really think you're somebody. And Eckankar does that really well. So I know people are 8th or 9th initiates, they ain't going to give it up.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about Freemasonry while you're talking about that. Like, well, I have this status, right? I mean, and that kind of gets. Let's see. I mean, I would say it's clearly Masonry isn't a destructive group or whatnot or a cult, but like there's just something to it that everybody's equal, and like, you know, you're an apprentice, fellowcraft master, and then the titles just get more grandiose. You can be a prince of the royal secret, right? And you can put on a crown and you know, represent King Solomon, right? So it's like, I think of it as like a respect showing organization where, I mean, everybody has the grandiose titles, right? Because that's the name of the degree. That's what you get. And it's just like you go there and you respect each other, like kind of profoundly, right? Where it's there's just something to it, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It makes people feel better about themselves. And there's a wonderful book by Louis Dumont. It's been somewhat critical, but it's called Homo Hierarchus, which means that human beings love hierarchies. We just do. And an example, this is, of course, it's going to sound a little sexist, but I've done this in front of my females and they agree with me. I said, if you walk into a party and you have a brand new dress on that you specially picked out, and you find out that some other girl has the same dress, how do you feel? Every girl I've ever talked to gets pissed. Now, let's imagine guys, we're playing basketball, okay? And you find out you tied in the game. How do you feel? You guys are like, tied, big whoop. They want to win. And I think, and so let's just play out with religion. If I can move up the hierarchy and get status and people show me respect, well, that's a real powerful thing. That's something I want. And I may not get it in the real world. See, I've often had this idea that the guys who become cult leaders are basically, again, I'm exaggerating par excellence, but you'll get it. In grammar school, at least when I went to grammar school, the most important thing was to be a good athlete, you know, to be like the good athlete. Okay, so you're not a good athlete. So now you become like a good musician, let's say, or then you become the comedian, you know, funny guy, or you become the mod person, or whatever it is, as you move up. And I said, finally, cult leaders are guys who never made anything. Their life went to shit. So finally they say, well, I'm God. You know, I didn't make it in high school. I'm God. Now you have to worship me. And it's exaggeration, but there's a certain truth to it. Gary Olson, by the way, nothing against him, but he told me, he goes, I was a house painter, painting houses. John Roger Hinkins, what was he? He was a high school teacher at Rosemead until he got booted out. Okay, nothing against that. It's a good profession, but that's not what he wanted. Take somebody like Paul Twitchell. He never had a job that really held on outside of like being a part-time, you know, writer and working at the YMCA and not having money. He had to borrow $300 from his 20-year-old girlfriend when he was 50 years old, right? So then he starts Eckankar. Well, now he's like, wow, shoo, went way up. So that's kind of my punchline to this stuff. If you got status already, you don't need to be a cult leader. Michael Jordan doesn't have to be a cult leader.
Yeah, how about well, I don't want to get political, but so I'm thinking about someone high status with a cult-like organization, right? What do you think about Trump? I'm not no. What's that?
I try not to. I joke.
There you go.
I was in the water at Kauai. We were just recently in Kauai with all my childhood friends. We're all surfing. And they know I've exposed cults. And one of the guys asked me, he says, "What's the most dangerous cult?" And I was kind of flummoxed. I couldn't really think it through. And then later on, I said, "Well, it's obvious. It's Trump. He's the most dangerous cult. The Republican Party is the most dangerous cult I've ever seen. Only for one reason. First of all, he lost the election, but he can't admit to it. But also because he's unwilling to look at America and make it work. All he wants to do is about himself. It's narcissism par excellence. As even Jordan Peterson, I'm surprised he did this, recently admitted he's like 11 years old. He's a bully of 11 years old. And I think with he's constantly wanting people to love him and status. So obviously in his life, he wasn't a great businessman. Let's be real clear. He went bankrupt 5 times? I mean, just play that out in your head. If your dad gave you $200 million, which apparently you seeded $200 million, and you put it in a bank, you probably made more money than Trump has. Nothing against him. He's obviously a smart, bright guy, whatever. But the punchline is, dude, you're 70 whatever years old. Why do you act like you're 11? What is so absent in your integrity that you have to lie thousands and thousands of times, be mean to people, just mean? Why? Why can't you just be happy? Well, there's something obviously unresolved, and he wants more status, and he wants people to worship him and love him and bow to him. How many times have you ever seen Trump is wrong? How many times do you see Trump say, "Well, I don't know very much"? All the time, I'm the greatest this, I'm the greatest this, I'm the greatest this. It's like, it's depressing. I mean, he makes Nixon look like a saint. That's all I want to say.
Yeah. So you'd say, like, in his mind, he's low status.
Yes. He's very deeply insecure. He's the most insecure human being I've ever seen. Why? He doesn't have to be insecure, right? He's got all this stuff. He's got almost everything. He's done a lot of stuff. What's there to be insecure about? I don't know what it is. There's a gaping hole in this guy that can't be filled.
So the rule holds then, where high status people, because he's to himself not high status.
That's it. It's really an internal thing. It doesn't have to be an external thing, right? Because like John Roger was a high school teacher. That's good. That's fantastic. Hey, Gary Olson was probably a good house painter. Cool. You understand? It's all your own perception. It's your own idea of what status should be. And you get this all the time with people. I met this guy once who really taught me a lesson. He worked at the Sunshine Store at UCSD. And he was the best guy behind the counter I've ever seen in my life. Well, he had 3 master's degrees. And he was the most he was not insecure at all. I asked him, he goes, "I just want to be the best cashier that's ever been." And he was so good. We always used to bow to him, because we get out of the food. And you're absolutely, it doesn't matter what job anybody has. It's just how you feel about yourself. So, and I think something's wrong with Trump. It's too bad, because he's ruining people. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not saying, Democrats are right. I'm not arguing that. Politics, first of all, you want to be a politician. I'm thinking, oh my God, can you imagine having to go to committee meetings? I'd want to shoot myself. You have to sit there for 2 hours. So, but it's too bad. Sad. I've never, I'm 66 years old. I've never seen politics like this in my whole life. This is the worst I've ever seen it.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Like, about our times, that where it's?
That's a very good question. I'd like to give a great sociological analysis. I think what we've seen since Watergate, since Nixon, we've seen, we just don't trust the institutions like we used to trust them. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And one could argue, I think Jaron Lanier, the very famous guy who developed virtual reality, he would probably argue it's social media, because now everybody has a voice, right? If you go back 40 years ago, the news was very short, And now there's 24-hour news, and now there's social media, and everybody thinks they know something. Bill Burr's pretty funny about this, the comedian. He came out and he said, well, my research on the internet tells me this, and then somebody else has got research, right? So that's, everybody's got an opinion, and everybody thinks they're right. So that could be the problem. We've all barfed each other out.
What was that last part?
Well, I use the word vomit. We've all barfed at each other, and we just, and so what's happened to people is that we've lost decorum. We've lost respect to each other, treating people nice on social media. I've always argued, because I've been on the internet. This sounds a little weird. I've been on the internet since 1984. People didn't think it existed. And I've been on very early on, before any of AOL came on and businesses came on, because I was at UCSD. And I noticed something. What happened is, once people went anonymous on the internet, like you have a username, people started being very disrespectful to each other, because they didn't own up to the responsibility that that's your name saying this. And I think that's really led to a lot of bad blood. And with politics, because of 24-hour news, people silo themselves. They just watch Fox News, or they just watch CNN or CNBC. And it's like an echo chamber. You just hear what you hear, and you don't listen to the other person. I teach a critical thinking class, and they ask me in one sentence, what is critical thinking? And it's a very simple thing. I said, critical thinking is your ability to admit to being wrong. If you can admit to being wrong, you're a critical thinker. That's it. And nobody wants to admit to being wrong about anything. And we have politicians, you're talking about religion, we want to follow somebody who's absolutely certain. And Trump says, people love him for that reason. He never apologizes. He knows everything.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess, so the trick is, you don't want to be right and admit when you're wrong.
That's it. And you want to learn, and you want to listen to other people. You want to show them respect, because, we're on a planet going 60,000 miles an hour around the sun, orbiting at 1,000 miles. We're on this third rock, and we're all going to die. There's a lot of pain and suffering. How about a little compassion? How about a little sweetness to each other? And wouldn't we like politicians that would show us that same kind of compassion? Look to the guy. Don't call people losers. Don't call people fat. What are you doing? What kind of human being does that? If he was 11 years old, if we were in grammar school, my friends say this, I went to an all-guy Catholic school. If he did this in high school, he would have been beaten up. We wouldn't have tolerated that. But we do. And that's kind of why we're at now, I guess. No. Sorry, I don't mean to offend people, but what can you say?
Yeah.
What can you say?
Yeah. Very good. All right. So,
on that note.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's good.
Talking to you, Dave. I got to get back here. I just lost half my audience,
Yeah, no. But, well, that's the thing. I mean, is admitting you're wrong, or being open to being convinced, right? So if we lost half the audience because they were diehard Trump supporters,
that's okay.
Maybe think about, try to minimize the importance of being right? Yeah. Or I'm sure we've offended probably most people listening. So
yeah, and that's okay, because as you're doing this podcast, if you're not offending somebody, you're really probably not doing a good podcast. Right. And because, I'm sure, there's a lot of things people can say about me, and that's good, because, I need to listen. I met a guru in India once who said this all the time. And he really meant it. He says, critics are your best friend. And somebody said, why? He said, well, because they're going to tell you what you don't want to hear. And that's how you listen. And it's tough as a teacher, I can tell you, because, I know I'm always wrong. So one of the great things as a teacher, after learning this about 25 years ago, I always tell my students how stupid I am. So I said, if I say something idiotic, just say it, because there's a lot of things I just don't freaking know. I don't know how to fix a car. I'm a complete idiot. So I always tell them, PhD means phenomenally dumb. MS, part of my language, means more shit. BS means bullshit. And an AS, which is an associate degree, is not even shit. It's associated shit. You're not even in it yet. And they get offended by that, but that's true because as you know, these degrees, again, a hierarchy, is a way of leveraging over other people. But it's not true. Like my boat mechanic is infinitely smarter than I am. If I was on a deserted island, this guy's never, I think he graduated high school. He doesn't read books, whatever. And he always talks about himself being stupid. I go, dude, you're infinitely smarter than I am. Because if we were on an island, you would be the leader and I would just do what you told me to do because you know how to fix anything. And that's true, right? I mean, that's what education should be about learning all sorts of different things and being functional and then realizing what you don't know.
Yeah, that you can't grow, I guess, if you think that everything is perfect as it is, right? Yeah.
So tell me a little more about yourself. I mean, since we're online, I'm interested. What at this stage of the game? What are you thinking? What's your ideas? What's your philosophy on life? How are you thinking about things?
Well, I don't know, right? Like I just, especially since I've started my YouTube channel, like a lot of different ideas where you wonder what to think about it, right? Like especially where we get into religion, what is going on really, yeah, I mean, like we were talking about before, we're both vegan, right? So
yeah, what made you turn? I'm curious. What made you turn vegan? What made you turn like a vegetarian? What was that? What was the point where you would go, I'm going to do this?
Well, yeah, and that's interesting because it's almost like the Apostle Paul, where probably immediately before I went vegetarian, I was the most anti-vegetarian.
Wow.
Right? And it's just cognitive dissonance, right? Like I thought vegetarian that's so stupid, right? Until I'm like, yeah, because you're trying to convince yourself, really, right?
I see.
And I always knew it was wrong to eat animals. Like I'd be, eating chicken, and you don't think about it when you're hungry, right?
Right.
But then after you're full, you're like, this was a living chicken, right? And I'm eating it. Like, what is going on, And so you just kind of become conscious of it. And but where I was going with that is like, I mean, we know pain is to be avoided and pleasure is good, right? So that's something, right? That it's good to be good. Just intrinsically good is good, right?
Were you influenced by anyone? Or did you read a book, or were you hanging out with some guys that were vegetarian or vegan, or was it?
I don't think so. I don't think so, really. Which is kind of interesting. Like
It's impressive. It's impressive that you could do it by yourself. Kind of.
I can't remember. It was just me. Like ever since I was little, like this beef used to be a living thing, right? And that's unsettling.
Yeah, it is unsettling. You're right.
And I don't know. I just kind of putting it off, right? And then just yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? We're just kind of but yeah, I can't think of any. I mean, there's some things that happened. I remember before I went vegetarian, I saw like there was a show, Master Chef or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Master Chef, is that what it's called? Master Kitchen? I don't remember. Lobster used to be my favorite food, right? But then he gets these big chopping knives and goes on the lobster, and then I'm like, right? And I'm like, well, at least it's dead now, right? But like part of it was still like flipping around, and I was like, I'm never eating lobster ever again.
Wow.
Right. And I remember back the grocery stores used to have the lobsters in the tank back in the day.
Oh yeah, right.
And I loved them like they were pets, but
wouldn't they pull them out and hit them with a hammer or something like that?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen them do that, but they were like, and I used to have hermit crabs, back in the day, so I wouldn't eat crab.
Okay.
But then
sympathize with it. You understood it.
Yeah. And and then kind of with going vegan, it was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, it always nagged on me, the whole egg thing and the whole milk thing, and like that's pretty messed up too. But that was just kind of the same thing where it's like, all right, I'm just gonna do that, right?
That's good. I mean, you're right. The last piece of chicken I ever had was almost 50 years ago. And what happened was I turned vegetarian and I opened up the refrigerator. I was kind of hungry. And Kentucky Fried Chicken used to be my favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky Fried Chicken I think it used to have MSG in it. And it was much more tasty back then, So I looked at it and I would just turn vegetarian. And I said, oh my God, if I just eat the skin of the thing, I'm still a vegetarian because I'm not really eating the meat, because it's all the flavor. So I ripped off the skin, right? So my brother, who's a full carnivore, cigarettes, meat eater, he walks in and he said, I've ripped the skin off the chicken. So he looked at me, he goes, hey, good vegetarian you are, ripping off the skin of a dead chicken, you sick bastard. And then, boom, I never ate meat again. My brother's really the one who did it. So I always blame him. And then my youngest son wanted vegan, and he's the one who got me to go vegan, like give up cheese and dairy and all that.
Yeah. So your son got you to go vegan?
Yeah, my youngest son. This is a very bright kid. He's been vegetarian since birth. And then several years ago, he goes, Papa, I'm turning vegan. And I looked at him, I said, why? And he goes, let's think about it. The dairy cows, they have them for 2 years and they mutilate them and whatever. And I go, all right. So the next day I turned vegan, because if my son can do it at 12 or whatever age he was then, and my wife's turned vegan as well. My oldest son, no, he loved my oldest son. He's cool. He goes, nah, I ain't doing that crap. I still like my eggs. He's a vegetarian, but he's not, I'm not giving up cheese. You guys are part of the weird. I'll expose you later. You exposed Eckankar, I'll expose your veganism.
Yeah, that's too funny. We're going full circle and talking about cults, right? But I'm a 12th level vegan, so I forget what movie is that from, right? Where
I love that. There's Simpsons has one where I'm a 4th level. I don't eat anything to cast a shadow.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah.
And you're right. You're right about veganism. Also, you got to be careful because some people can get really obnoxious. Like we used to have this guy speak on veganism this years ago, and he was really a cult guy because he was just mean. Like anybody ate meat's evil, and blah blah blah. It's just like terrible. And people just do what they got to do. You got to be generous. You know what I mean? I always think we're omnivorous anyways, right? Obviously, early humans ate whatever they could, and so you just got to be nice about it. You can't look at somebody and get obnoxious about it. Yeah. Like I have one really bad downfall. I love classic Coke, not Coca-Cola. I mean, Coca-Cola, not Coke. I mean, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I don't like, oh, yeah, that's why. I can see it, buddy. I can see it in your eyes. A little red there. No, I love classic Coke, because when I was a kid, my mom would give us these 12-ounce bottles of Coke. And I love Coke. I've minimized my Coke intake. But, a lot of people get on my case. Well, how could you drink that? It's just terrible. I go, it's really tasty. I really like it. So everybody's got something,
Yeah. Well, and how they say, how do you know if the person in line ahead of you is a vegan? Yes. Right? Oh, they'll tell you, right?
Exactly, right. It's the big deal. But you have to tell people you're vegan because otherwise they'll serve you meat. That's why you tell people.
Yeah, no, that's true. But this is my, I think, 12th interview on my channel. Maybe I'm off. I don't remember. But maybe I'm a little bit self-impressed that I've never mentioned going vegan. Well, subtly, right? In some of and that there was a polemic against a certain religion that they ate the flesh of corpses, right? And I said, or they ate the meat of corpses. And I'm like, what other kind of meat is there? Right. So it's like subtle influence, but.
Nice. Well, Catholicism, we're cannibals. I mean, we take the body of Jesus Christ, transubstantiation.
There you go. So could a believing Catholic be vegan to take the
Well,
sacraments?
well, exactly. Like when we used to eat the communion host, the nuns told us don't chew on it, right? You're not supposed to chew. I don't know if you know this. And so, well, the problem was it gets stuck on the roof of your mouth. So you end up licking Jesus instead of eating Jesus. It's a bad joke, but that's what happened. Every Catholic knows this. And then, of course, they believe in wine. They don't believe in grape juice like, the Lutherans do. And, they drink the blood. Literally, it's substantiation. It's really, in some mystical, weird way, it turns into the blood of Jesus. So that's kind of some voodoo stuff. But I got to watch it because I have a lot of Catholic friends. They're going to get upset.
Yeah, I didn't know that you're not supposed to chew it. You're just supposed to let it dissolve in your mouth.
You're not supposed to take it in your hand either. We were told, like young kids, 7 or 8 years old, don't take it out of your mouth and put it in your hand. Jesus doesn't like that. He likes to just be consumed immediately.
Without chewing, like.
Well, because chewing was like, it's like you're eating a meal, and you're supposed to be a little more, respectful. And so you just kind of like, and then all of a sudden it gets stuck in the roof of your mouth, and you're like stuck there for, like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I think it's ELCA when they do the communion, right? I think it's something like, let's eat the meal before us, or the feast, or I forget what it is. And then it's just a wafer and like a little thimble full of wine, and they're calling that like the meal before us, which is kind of like a little.
Yeah, it's not very much.
Yeah.
And the priest, I always noticed the priest really relished when they had to drink the wine out of a goblet, before they seemed to really enjoy it. It's like, oh, this is the best part of the Mass.
Yeah. Now, do you think the whole Eucharist thing was part, like, what do you think about that?
I think I have an idea about this. In India, I've been to India many, many times, and there's a thing called prasad, which means blessed food. And it's a big thing. And even in Judaism, it's a big thing that if somebody comes to your house, like a guest or even a stranger, you're supposed to take care of them. And you're supposed to share your food with them. Yeah, the guru would bless the food. And when he blessed it, you would eat the food and be like prasad, blessed food. So I suspect that there may be a historical basis to the idea that Jesus would break bread with his disciples, and they would consider what he offered them as sacred. Like there's a word called hierophany, something that's ordinary but would conveys the sacred. So that seems like a common motif in some religions. I would not. Now, I don't think he really said, well, this is my body, all that stuff. I think that's much added on later. But the idea that they would eat with him and take it as a sacred thing, I could see that. That makes sense.
Yeah. And you also see it in Mithraism, where Sol and Mithras eating a meal together. And the Mithraians did that, right? They ate a big meal together. So I've wondered if you could piece together a mystery cult, like figure out like if there was like a ritual to it, right? Yeah. What would it be based off of what we're seeing?
That's right.
Probably communal meal, part of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's not new. It's not a new invention. This has been around. It's just too common.
Yeah, like the Bacchus cult, which is the funnest, right?
Oh yeah, man.
Just
the party
drink. Yeah.
It's now called Vegas. You go to Vegas now to do that.
There you go. And just like a mystery cult, what happens there
stays
there. Yeah.
Except for COVID. It's the one thing you get COVID in Vegas, you bring it to everybody else.
Yeah, and maybe a few other things. So the joke goes. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, brilliant. Maybe we'll leave it there. I mean, do you anything that any loose ends that you're thinking about?
No, I don't think so. You've been really good. It's a lot of fun talking to you, bro. It's really you're very good.
No, yeah, it was very good. A lot of that very profound. where like I didn't know how to respond to a lot of it because it was like, I've never heard that. I've never thought of anything like that. Really, I didn't know how to follow up. I'm like,
I'll be sending you my cult brochures later. I'm just joking.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's do it.
Yeah, no, that's
and maybe
this is a really good thing you're doing. This podcasting thing is just a wonderful way of communicating information, especially the long form of it. It's really, really quite good. Jaron Lanier, we talked about him earlier. He's a famous guy. He believes that podcast is like what the web used to be like 30 years ago. It's like it's really grassroots. It's real genuine information. People, it's a really good what you're doing. It's interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
cool.
Well, all right, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. Man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if you'd like, we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, let's keep in touch. Anything you need.
Yep, absolutely. All right, and then if our listeners want to like it, like this video, they can like it. Also, disliking. A lot of people don't mention this, but that also helps. So if you didn't like it, you can do that and subscribe too.
That's right.
All right. All right. Well, thanks again so much. I really loved it.
Thanks, man. Take care, man. Okay, bye.